Well, good day to everyone joining us and welcome to today's X-Talks webinar. Today's talk is entitled Unlocking Success, a deep dive into delivering acute care at home. My name is Ryan Muse and I'll be your X-Talks host for today. Today's webinar will run for approximately 60 minutes, and this presentation includes a Q&A session with our speakers. Now, the webinar is designed to be interactive, and webinars work best when you're involved. So please feel free to submit your questions and comments for our speakers throughout the presentation using the questions chat box, and we'll try to attend to your questions during the Q&A session. This chat box is located in the control panel, which is on the right-hand side of your screen. And if you require any assistance along the way, you can contact me at any time by sending a message using the same chat panel. At this time, know that all participants are in listen-only mode, and please note that the event will be recorded and made available for streaming on xtalks.com. At this point, I'd like to thank Bioformus, who developed the content for this presentation. Bioformus brings the right care to every person, no matter where they are. The company's AI-driven solution collects and analyzes biomarkers in real time and identifies shifts that require proactive interventions. This vital innovation enables Bioformus to offer people everywhere connected access to hospital-level services, virtual provider networks for remote care, and life-changing clinical trials, all without leaving their homes. Now I'd like to introduce our speakers for today's event. Ian McDaniel is the Vice President of Customer Success at Bioformus, where he builds and leads operational and clinical implementation teams and creates smooth transitions for clients from sales to operational success. He is also responsible for identifying and driving success metrics and KPIs while balancing a consultative approach with partnerships and promoting the voice of the customer to the internal executive team. And Dr. Avi Ronai is a pediatric neurologist and the director of the Pediatric Concussion Program at Northwell Health. He also serves as the physician lead for the remote monitoring program. Dr. Ronai earned his medical degree from the Technion Institute of Technology and completed his residency in pediatrics and child neurology at Cohen Children's Medical Center and Boston Medical Center. But now, without further ado, I'd like to go ahead and hand the mic over to our moderator for today's discussion. Ian McDaniel, you may begin when you're ready.
Great, thanks, Ryan. Well, welcome everybody, and thanks for attending today. This will be a fun conversation where we can walk through a lot of learnings that Northwell Health has had, and really some good insight that I think will be helpful for everybody that's embarking on any type of care at home, that there's bits and pieces of this that I think all will find very valuable. So thank you for taking the time today. And I would encourage, as Ryan mentioned, drop those questions into the chat, and we'll insert them as able. And if we miss anything there towards the end, we'll pick up some additional questions then. So Dr. Ronai, let's talk about for Northwell Health, how did all this how did care at home get started? Because that certainly wasn't the normal at some point, and at some point Northwell Health had to step into that. Can you give us a little bit of history there?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Ian. The truth is, care at home or virtual care, our exploration even began multiple years ago, even before the peak of COVID. With use cases that were a little bit more diagnosis specific and practices or programs. For example, the Pediatric Teleconcussion Program. It was not until the peak of COVID, just like in many other institutions, that the need to continue to provide care from the patient's home scaled up quickly to satisfy the needs of both our patients and our physicians when social distancing was required. Of course, shortly after, once scaled implementation of telehealth, the value of asynchronous clinical awareness through the collection of physiological parameters from the comfort of the patient's own home was realized, and our journey into RPM began. This started off first through exploration of our internal capabilities within our institution, later expanding to finding out and collaborating with others for external capabilities that led to multiple pilots, primarily focusing on high acuity diagnosis, for example, CHF, COPD exacerbation, which then ultimately paved the way for the creation of our current state RPM program at our institution.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Fun fact, the very first remote care happened many years ago, actually in an airport setting, not necessarily Northwell Health, but I think you bring up a really good point that's important for context when we talk about remote care, when we talk about bringing care into the home, that the tools have changed. That, you know, as a pediatrician, as your starting point some time back, I know I've had kids and I've had lots of phone calls with pediatricians, right? That essentially is remote care. But the evolution that we've seen in the change is now all of a sudden you're getting vital signs, you're getting questionnaire answers, you're able to leverage data in a very different way than what we had in the past. So talk me through a little bit how that change being the common theme that we'll talk about throughout this webinar today, how that change has impacted clinicians, how that change has impacted patients, that evolution to where you are today.
So there's been a massive evolution. We've done telehealth and virtual care, as you mentioned, for a very long time. From the pediatric standpoint, we monitor patients with electroencephalograms, like to monitor procedures. We do electrocardiograms from home. But the ability to gain that information in an asynchronous fashion without the patient having to be in front of us, that is where the evolution has come. To receive that data, being able to react to that data at the right time, right place, right time, for the right reason for the patient. That's where the most clinical, the most impactful things have come from remote monitoring. Now, it's important to know that the more data that we have, the more responsibility. But also data is powerful, but too much data without meaning can lose its power. So it's very important to, when dealing with new types of technologies that are abstracting data on a day-to-day, we need to know what we're going to do with the data, how we're going to react to it, and how are we going to positively impact our patient on a day-to-day.
Yeah, you bring up such a fantastic point. I remember early in my career with virtual care, I was toting around some new tools for clinicians. It was actually, ironically, a pediatrician. She was the chair of the department, and I said, I have this stethoscope, this electronic stethoscope, and I think you've been familiar with some of these tools. And it was actually my kid, and I said, hey, can you try this? Because I'm trying to see if this is something good for the institution. And her response back was, well, I heard something with the electronic stethoscope. I did not hear anything with my normal stethoscope. And it really brings the question, now I'm hearing something, what actually does that mean? Because does it mean it's clinically relevant? And I think that ties into very much what you just said. Data is good, but what does the data mean to us when we're now delivering care in the home? So talk a little bit about, you know, we came from virtual care where we just did this video interaction, right? We experienced that. A lot of us experienced that through the COVID pandemic. And then we've started to add more and more vitals. Talk me through some of the basic vitals that you guys do engage with at Northwell Health. What do those vitals mean? And what are some of the challenges that come with collecting patient-collected data?
So, I mean, some of the vitals that we do collect are basic vitals that we all know. For example, blood pressure, heart rate, respiratory rate, glucose levels, and even activity. Some people believe that activity and steps is kind of like the fifth vital that gives a more comprehensive view of the patient. Now, when collecting these vital signs, it's all about context. So what is the patient doing? What is, is it morning? Is it afternoon? We need to be able to provide context, because of an isolated vital without the rest of the comprehensive view of the patient is only as valuable as the actual specific parameter and how we compare it to the standard of care. But understanding patients as a whole is what is going to get us to the next level of this monitoring outside of the brick and mortar walls institution. So understanding where our patients are at, whether in a single nurse nurse facility, or they're at home, or they're at school, or depending on the situation, is very, very important for us to be able to react to these parameters that we're not collecting, that we were collecting before, but we weren't seeing them as quickly as we are now. So that's something that that we've learned over the past couple of years. We're going to continue to learn. We're going to continue to learn how to combine a lot of parameters that at times we were just looking at a single unit. Now we're looking at multiple parameters to create another type of biomarker that gives a more complex view of the patient.
I love that, Avi. I think one of the things that is so interesting to me is just the longitudinal point of the data. If you look at a patient that you may see maybe 1-2 times a year, and so we say, okay, that's maybe the generally healthy patient. But now what you at Northwell Health, and we'll get into and start talking about a little bit some of the groups of patients that you guys are looking at or planning to look at. A lot of what you're dealing with is more chronic conditions that are ongoing well over time. And so you may see those patients, the clinician may see them in the office maybe 4 times a year. So just imagine, and then I want you to walk me through what this means in clinical care and the value of it. Over a period of a year, you may get 4 blood pressure measurements because they came into the office. But now you have a cohort of patients right now where you're monitoring blood pressure. You're getting a blood pressure every single day. What does that mean now that you have this longitudinal set of data? What does that mean to the patient's care? And help me understand for the clinician what now is going on in their mind with this tremendous change in volume of data.
Yeah, so from the patient's standpoint, I mean, I believe that our patients try to, they go to the doctor because they want to get better, right? Or they are aware that there's something that they need care from. Now, going to our physician's office at times may be a little bit of a struggle from the access point, right? Getting in to see our physician in a timely manner to get the medication that we need or to get the treatment or advice that we need, it might not be the easiest. So RPM has brought a little bit of a wider door into the care that every single one of us deserves. Now, just because we see our physician doesn't mean we achieve the goals that we need to achieve in a timely manner. So you're describing patients going to the physician 4 times a year. Yeah. Okay, so at the first touch point, we receive the initial assessment and the initial plan. But then it takes such a long time to get to the next step that we hopefully, if the patients have accomplished all the steps that they need to take, even before they reach the next touch point. So how do we speed up the process of our patients reaching their goals in a more timely manner? Now, what does that mean to the physician? So if our patients are getting better, and they're getting healthier, some physicians might say, oh, this, I'm not seeing the same amount of patients that I need to see from the standards, right? So that's totally fine, because it is if we get a certain population healthier in a timely manner, it might open more access to patients that actually need the acute care and need the appointment that person that was supposed to be seen in 3 months from now could forgo, and then we can open it up for someone more acute.
That's right. I love that. So you've now touched into a place I wanted to go next, Dr. Renai, is this idea of change for clinicians, this idea of change for organizations, this idea of overall change management, which in general, healthcare, we struggle with that a lot. We struggle with it a lot because from a provider standpoint, you sign off to say, I'm going to do no harm. And so the risk of doing something different always introduces that risk of doing harm. But in addition to that, I think you just touched on one that I think is a bit of a hidden one. Wait a minute, if my patient actually gets better, which is certainly what I want, but all my data, what I've been working with is that patient's going to come in every other month and I'm going to check on them. And if they start getting better, what's going to fill that spot? It's change. It's a lot of change. So talk me through a little bit on change management with an organization. What does it look like, and what are some of the big hairy barriers that come with that?
Well, I mean, culture change is one of the biggest difficulties when you have a new, innovative, transformative workflow that is introduced into a system. And that takes time. That's something that we all learned, and I'm learning right now, that the first time that you introduce it to leadership, you might not get buy-in. The second, third, you start to get a little bit of momentum. But changing culture is one of the difficult ones. But things are starting to catch up, right? People are starting to buy in that virtual care or care in general is more of a continuous type of journey of the patient. It doesn't stop when the patient leaves the hospital or leaves the practice. It continues. And the faster we're able to provide the care that the patient deserves at the right place at the right time, the more impactful we can be for the entire population. Also, this brings to the point of the shrinking workforce, right? If we are able to leverage auxiliary teams or task shift, things that one resource can do on behalf of the other, it allows for the physicians to provide access to patients that need more acute care and different type of care. So there's a lot of change that is coming our way. People are slowly adapting to it, but they are adapting to it, and they acknowledge that there's a lot of challenges that are happening to the institution itself. As I mentioned, the shrinking workforce and the changes in scope of how we can practice and when we can practice.
Yeah. Dr. Renee, when you've talked to other physicians, when you've talked to other provider groups, as you're introducing, hey, here's a tool set we have to help your patient, what are some of the things that come up? And I'll just give you a couple of examples to kind of trigger these conversations, because I don't know about you, but I've sat in some of these conversations. I thought, I don't want to remember this conversation. These are tough conversations. So just to trigger your mind on a couple of these, I know I've sat in conversations where trust, do I trust the data, has come up in those conversations. I've had conversations, is this going to take more work for me because I don't have time to do this more work? I can think of conversations where, well, is this gonna be in the EHR, or am I gonna have to search for it somewhere else? Those are a couple of things that come up. If you could talk to any of those in those conversations, how have you talked to your provider groups at Northwell Health to really dig in on those things? What has been the journey in some of those?
So, I mean, I've touched on every single one of these topics that you mentioned, with all our physicians that have enrolled patients in the RPM program. The validity of the data, using the right device for the right program for the right population is extremely important. Not cutting yourself short, just going for the cheaper device because that's what your program can afford. At the end of the day, might not be the most valuable. Right? We've understood that, for example, pulse oxes have different validity and sensitivity for different skin tones. So it's important to choose the right device for the right population, because ultimately we want to make people healthier and impact and do well for them. Now, from all my colleagues are very enthusiastic in regards to RPM. Oh, this is a wonderful service that you're providing to us. But what do you need from me? What is my responsibility? And what do I need to do to get this going? So from what we learned is that yes, and there's been multiple surveys out there from the AMA about RPM and introducing into the practice. Everyone's very enthusiastic and everyone wants it. But the orchestra, the operational orchestra that goes behind to be able to outreach patients, enroll them, consent them, monitor them, document, all these things can be a big operational burden to the practices. And that's something that we at Northwell, we've attempted to remove from the practice so that pretty much physicians can do what they need to do, which is just take care of the patient, and our program would take care of the rest.
So, okay, let's talk about that a little bit more, and let's pull on that thread of the idea of, so you talked about how, before we even get to the adoption, that's what you're talking about really, is the adoption of it. And you said, hey, I got to remove the barrier of workload on them. And so Northwell Health has essentially set up a group or a team that can support that actual work. So it doesn't come back to the office. So I heard that. But what about getting the actual adoption? What are some things that have been successful for you and your team of getting the interest of the provider, but also then action behind the provider? The things that come up for me that I've seen, Avi, just to, as to trigger thoughts, are we've seen, we've had providers say, if you can just say to your patient, hey, this is something as your caregiver, I recommend, as your provider, I recommend you do this and compliance for this. We've seen examples of where we've talked to the nursing teams. Sometimes it really goes back on the nursing teams and say, hey, can you engage the patient to get them set up and get started? What are some of the things that you guys have seen be successful at Northwell?
Yeah, so I think this revolves around relationship management. That's the overall theme of this. The first step is our RPM team being able to gain trust from the physicians that are going to be engaging with doing the initial engagement with the customers, which are the patients, right? If I gain the trust of the referring physicians or the RNs and make them understand that this is a capability that we are one and all, right? We're together with you. We're a team. You're not just sending your patient off to the RPM team. We are an extension of your practice. We work with you. That's the first thing. The next thing is about the relationship between the patient and the physician. It should not be that, oh, I'm referring you to the RPM program. It should be the physician saying, I think this monitoring I recommend this monitoring to you, and I think it will make you better, and I will be part of your journey. Me, the physician, I'm prescribing it to you, and together we're going to make you feel better. So that type of engagement is extremely important if you want to make an RPM program work. The next step is it has to do also with marketing. You need to be able to continuously nudge physicians and patients about this program. For our program, it's as easy as putting in an order in our EMR to get things rolling. Yeah. But as we know, out of sight, out of mind. That we don't remind, that we don't nudge, and the physicians referred once. Okay, so once they referred, let's nudge them again to refer to the program. Yeah. That's also very important. And the last thing is about aligning with leadership and our quality initiatives. Programs cannot be isolated to the needs of our community. If we don't align our programs with the quality initiatives of our institution, and for example, I know a lot of institutions are dealing with hypertension, dementia, diabetes, and for example, depression. If we don't align with those specific initiatives, then we're just working very isolated, and it's going to be very hard to continue to engage, capture the minds of our physicians, our patients, and so on.
Yeah, I think you bring a couple good points there. Large institutions take time. It goes back to change management and looking at what are the incentive plans literally at a provider level that are going to flow through to be able to capture the same value. And I think many times RPM gets set up in this idea of, well, it's really only just a value-based care initiative. Well, no, it's actually much more than that, right? We can look back to really how are the physicians being encouraged to use this literally through existing incentive plans and tying that all together and helping them know that. Adoption of anything new is always challenging, without question. I remember when I had the opportunity to launch a virtual care program, just doing a virtual visit, I had the marketing team make up script pads that said, let your next visit be a virtual visit. Why? Just because the irony of putting paper for something virtual really took me. But the idea is what is front of mind. So when they opened up that drawer to write a script, gosh, if my pad's sitting there behind him, is that effective? What have you used with marketing or just in general in communications to be able to try to reinforce programs and try to indicate the why for providers to keep referring? What have you guys at Northwell Health really used to be able to be effective in that way?
Well, we've leveraged different mechanisms. There's in regards to remote monitoring, multiple ground rounds with specific specialties, internal medicine, family medicine, cardiology, nephrology, and so on. We also, it's been a big lift to have individualized discussions with physicians in practices that can get the buy-in from others. Also gaining medical champions that are big, refers into the program and having them work to help us spread the word. That's the more personal type of engagement and marketing that we've done with our institution. Now, of course, there's the flyers and the communications and so on that a lot of institutions already do. But the main thing is that this connection, this conversation that we're having, this is the most important type of communication that we need to have to grow a program.
Yeah.
We've also used one more thing. We also used a lot of the data that we're collecting from our, for example, blood pressure management program. Those clinical impacts and showing the data to the providers. Look, this is what you're actually the positive outcomes that are coming out from these programs. This is what you're actually doing by referring to into the program. Look how the blood pressure actually dropped, and it dropped even quicker than waiting for a 3-month follow-up appointment. I think that's where also the value comes in, showing what the actual outcomes and the KPIs of the program to the referring providers. That's where you also get the buy-in.
Yeah, tying the fact that, hey, your investment of 3 minutes in that office visit netted actual positive improvement in blood pressure management in less than 3 months, when you would have just been starting to see them again 3 months later. That's, I mean, tying that together has got to be powerful. So being able to speak with outcomes and to be able to speak with clinical data is certainly enforces that work. Tell me a little bit about, though, because you just talked about grand rounds. You talked about kind of capturing a bunch of different specialties. Dr. Renee, how have you guys set up your program at Northwell Health to be effective in a way to be able to address such diverse population, both patient populations, but even the interest of providers? Because providers, I don't know if you've met some of them, but I have. And some of them are, hey, very specific. Hey, I'll do this, but I need this. So what can you talk to me a little bit about how Northwell Health, with your leadership, has set up a program to be able to be effective in doing that?
Yeah. So first question, I mean, there's always going to be the 80-20 rule, right? And there's going to be the physicians the overall physicians that want 80%, and then the 20%ers that want something very specific.
Yeah.
I think you have to plan for both, have specific workflows for both, but concentrate on the ones that will be able to help you scale and reproduce. And to those specific words, I mean, I think in general, when you're creating an RPM program, you need to think about 3 specific components that will get you to the next stage. And that's the ability to scale, right? Making a scalable program that not just focuses on one biomarker for one specific diagnosis, but one biomarker for many, right? For many diagnoses, one device for many diagnoses. So you can open up your scope and be able to provide the equitable care to every single specialty out there, not specifically focusing on the census or the number of patients an adult practice may have versus a pediatric practice may have. If the need is there, you should be able to provide it. The other thing is about reproducibility, right? So when creating a program, you should think about how are you going to template a care pathway or a way to get a patient into the program so that you can reproduce it for any other specialty or disease cohort and so on. So in general, I'm sure a lot of people already know that there's 4 major phases in regards to RPM. You have the pre-enrollment where you identify patients, you consent patients, you educate patients. You have the enrollment phase where you connect the patients, you onboard them, you show them how to use the device, then the monitoring, and then the end of the month where you justify the care, you make a plan of care, and then you go on to the next. You either modify the care plan or you graduate the patient from that specific care pathway. And the last thing is the sustainability, right? There has to be an economic, unfortunately in medicine, there has to be an economic argument that satisfies the institution's needs from the ROI standpoint. Some might leverage the RPM CPT codes that that are out there, but there's other arguments about the downstream effects, such as reduced readmissions, reduced length of stay, and that should be considered.
Okay, that's helpful to keep in mind. When you look at overall, what does the future look like in this space? I mean, what are we? I guess I would ask it around a couple specific areas. One, what does it look like? What are the barriers we're going to continue to come up against? What is kind of not going to change there? Let's start with that question, then we'll go into a little more on the future.
So some of the challenges, that we're going to face when it comes to virtual care is there's still the requirement for interoperability of different platforms and being able to integrate different workflows that before they didn't work together. We need that specific alignment that I think we're going to face some challenges here and there, but slowly we're going to be able to overcome. The other thing is about regulations, right? The way that we can provide, we are very stringent on the way that we can provide RPM care based on the regulations that have been set forth by CMS and so on. So unless we expand on those and not provide leniency, but align with the way that we should care for patients, I think that's going to take us a long way. And if you want, I can give you an example of how in order to provide any type of virtual care, you need to be an established patient of a specific practice and have the institute relationship with the patient. So unless we are a little bit more malleable and being able to not share patients, but say, these are our patients and we're taking care of them as a whole, I think, we're still going to struggle. And finally, of course, this is something that we all know, the security of the devices and security of the technology. That's something that we always have to keep in mind. The fancier our gadgets get, the fancier the security will need to get. So we should always try to consider that. Ultimately, I believe that RPM care at home is here to stay. It will become the standard of care, but it might be a little bit of a roller coaster before we get to the comfort zone that we have for the regular care, brick and mortar care that we are providing today.
Yeah, that's right. But what about, so that's some of the barriers and the challenges, and then you ended it with it's coming, and I would say, I think I'm with you mostly. I would say it's here, but it's maybe not here in the exact form. I think there's going to be continuous evolution there. So on that point of evolution, Dr. Renai, talk me through when you think about, gosh, the world out there and the speed in which technology is changing. What's coming for us in remote patient care? What kind of excites you as to what's coming in this world of bringing care to the patients in their home?
So, there's a lot of exciting things coming out there, but some of the non-intrusive ways of monitoring patients with, for example, radar technology and the ability to not have to connect the patient to any type of device to be able to monitor them, that is something that is pretty fascinating and is here already. It's just a matter of being able to implement and understand the validity that we spoke about before. Also, our ability to change the way we think of the transitions of care, of that transition of care doesn't necessarily mean that you need to change, the patient needs to move from home to the hospital, but that the transition of care can occur at the patient's own home. I think that's also wonderful. There's a lot of work that's been going on with hospital at home and so on, but the ease of transition, that's where I think we have a little bit of work to do.
Yeah, you're talking a little bit about the acuity, I think, of the patient, right? The level of acuity of the patient, and that there's this. It's not as delineated as we treat it today, right? Today we treat it, hey, you're at home RPM versus in the ED versus on a med-surg unit versus on an ICU. It's not as delineated, but there's a line there that maybe gets smoothed out quite a bit with the use of technology. Can you touch on a little bit, where is Northwell Health right now in the acuity of patients that they take, and what may be coming in the future as you explore that world?
So in Northwell Health, I mean, we are doing a lot of work in the inpatient world, starting from the most acute, monitoring patients in a little bit more about continuous fashion. Not doing continuous monitoring, but getting data more seamlessly, and working tremendously to create algorithms that will detect deterioration early on. That's some of the things that we're working on. We're also working on taking that patient that has been monitored in the inpatient world and taking the same devices and same tools and removing them from that brick and mortar wall institution and transitioning to a less acute type of setting, like, for example, transitional care management and so on. And lastly, being able to move them from the TCM world to the chronic care management and being able to bring them back and forth like a continuous type of cycle. That is something that we're working on today, and I'm very excited for it.
Yeah, when you talk about that and transitioning back and forth, I get very excited about, with all the data we're able to collect on the remote patient monitoring side of things, that really using existing AI tools, tools that literally are in place today. I think very soon we're going to be able to see triggers that say, hey, this patient, have a look at this patient, because I think this patient is headed in the wrong trending direction, and we need to increase their level of touch, their level of engagement at home, so that we don't bring them back in. I think some of those tools already exist today. I think you guys have the opportunity to use some of those tools today to see trends in the wrong direction, to be able to engage and take action. Talk to me a little bit about the use of this idea of care pathways. So we're used to, in the medical world, talking about care plans, accepted, what are the care plans? But we use the term, I think we've used it with you many times, this idea of a care pathway, the kind of the digital side of it. How have you guys flexed through care pathways, and what has that brought for you guys in scale, and what does that look like as you expand into other options?
So care pathways, the way that I translate it, is more about how we engage patients depending on their acuity, no matter the type of biomarker. And it should be something that can be we should attempt to try to replicate it for any type of patient, whether it's a pediatric patient or an adult patient per se. And I'll give you an example. Right now in a blood pressure management program, standard of care is to collect blood pressure measurements, twice a day, 2 times in the morning, 2 times at night. That is clinically warranted, specifically for the patients that are currently being managed with blood pressure medications, that their blood pressure is liable and just changing very quickly. Now, there's going to be a certain point that the care pathway might evolve to someone that you need less engagement or more engagement from the patient. And engagement means we're talking about collection of biomarkers and also collection of, about what you mentioned, PGH, patient-gathered health data, through questionnaires or communications with the patients. Now, the biomarkers, so the biomarker strategy is a little bit different than what others, the usual is like, oh, let's focus on CHF, let's focus on COPD. The biomarker strategy is creating protocols for each biomarker, blood pressure, weight, that is dependent on the acuity, and the response to it, or the trigger to respond, is depending on the acuity of the patient. So if someone is post, a cardiac surgery or a CHF exacerbation, you might react to the change in weight differently. For those, those two cohorts, you might react differently to the change in weight differently than someone that was in a care pathway for the same biomarker that was on a weight management program, right? So the trigger to react is different, and that bariatric, the weight management program could be the same care pathway that you use for different type of populations. So its ability to use these types of care pathways for different types of diagnosis, whatever the needs of the patient are.
Yep. And then being able to digitally change what are the triggers. So you're not changing an entire care pathway, right? You're just changing, what I'm hearing you say is you're changing the triggers based on the patient's need, based on the specialty need. So along that same lines, we've actually got a question from the audience. So if you're listening in right now and you're listening to this live, you can certainly type questions into the chat for Dr. Ronai to respond to. When you think about, you named a couple specialties there, you mentioned a couple earlier, what specialties, so someone has asked us, what are the specialties you think are best for programs like these? Have you begun to expand your inclusion based on that, or where are you at in that journey of bringing it to additional specialties?
So we're in the process of exploring these other specialties. We're in multiple conversations to create these care pathways, specifically focusing on specialties that require a lot of navigation in their care. Some of these specialties, as we all know, are oncology. Oncology requires a lot of navigation from the moment that the diagnosis is made to the moment of the first treatment plans. And these treatment plans are in a cycle and recur in a way. Other specialties that would benefit from these types of programs, for example, are bariatric surgery, pre, post, and in between. And not necessarily, I know that there's a lot of hype around GLP-1 and those sorts of medications, but not necessarily just focus on that, but focus more on the entire journey of a patient in the weight management world. Pediatrics is in our horizon. Pediatrics, even though I'm a pediatrician and I would love to start something tomorrow, there are some programs more in the acute type of setting, like post-cardiac surgery, like that single ventricle surgeries that would require type of monitoring, different type of level as other programs, but that's something that is in our horizon. Hypertension management for pediatrics is also something that we're starting to do in parallel. COPD patients, pulmonary patients is also a specialty that is of high interest.
Okay, fantastic. Excuse me. I've got another question from the audience. What are one or two things you just wish you would have known before you started diving deep into these programs? What can you think of one or two things you're like, oh man, I wish I would have known that? What would it be?
So I think I mentioned this a little bit, and it revolves around the engagement and buy-in. So that I wish I would have known the importance of, requirement of like the big lift of having the patient and physician buy-in before we went to implementation. The amount of like personal marketing that has gone into it, I wish I would have known that, and I wish we would have had the plan that we have now. We would have had it before. And the other thing is, it's more of a personal one, and we all want to conquer the world in one day, but it's sometimes difficult. So I wish I could have reminded myself that change in culture of how and where we take care of patients is not a one-day mission, but a little bit more of a journey, per se.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I've heard feedback similar to that I wish I would have known this was like taking on a new job where I needed to be able to have some early, easy wins to be able to build momentum, because that momentum is so important and needed in not a sprint, but really a marathon in a journey. Does that ring true for you in your experience?
That resonates a lot. Yes, that's it has been my job. It's not a hobby. It started as a hobby, but now it's been my day-to-day job, 24/7. Don't stop thinking about ways to improve, ways to streamline. The orchestra can always get better, and that's the way I think an RPM program will hopefully get to the point that we need to get to.
But I think you bring up, that's the evolution of medicine that we're all experiencing right now, is the evolution of how and where we deliver care. I think you've said that at the very beginning of the call, is bringing the right care to the right patient at the right time. Now, that used to be, is it the right floor of the hospital? That used to be, is it a clinic or a hospital? But now we've expanded it so significantly at this point. The great news is, I think what you're sharing with us in technology is the sky's the limit. The really bad news is the sky's the limit. And how do we adjust for that? Another question from the audience here is, what has been one of the largest, the most significant resistance you've had from a provider, and how did you overcome it?
Yeah, so one of the things that we provide in an RPM program is we, on behalf of the referring physician, we do medication management. Mm-hmm. And there's been there's a lot of us that we are happy for you to take care of our patient from the RPM standpoint, but from the medication management, we would like to do that ourselves, and that is totally fine. Medicine is an art, and everyone practices their own style of along with standard of care. But for that specific requirement, that's the 20% of the public. For that specific requirement, so that would mean that the physicians need a little bit more data in a more continuous fashion, right? Mm-hmm. So if your program is meant to provide clinical data or the vital signs on a monthly basis, because that's what the operations allows for these physicians that would like to do their own medication management, then you're going to have to provide the data a little bit more frequently so they can make the medication changes according to the standard of care.
Yeah, if they're going to want to own it. And so you talked about, I think you're referencing back that you guys at Northwell Health have established a team of people that's doing this work, so it doesn't have to flow back to the office, because we know many of, and this is what most medical practices experience around the nation, is their medical practices are busy. They're not sitting around waiting for more patient interaction or waiting for more data. That's not the issue. But it's just trying to stay above water with everything that comes in. And so I think I just want to come back to what you just said there was, you said, look, so they're saying, hey, we want this program, we want to manage this, but to do this, here's what we're going to need from you. And you're trying to figure out that navigation of, okay, well, if you're going to need every 3 days a report or every 2 days a report or something, how do I leverage the technology and the tools to do that?
Yeah. And that's part of the initial conversations with practices and physicians about understanding the expectations and the capability that we can provide, that we can bring to the table, and making sure that there's alignment throughout. Because if there's no good communication between teams, then that's where we can get into trouble.
Yep. Yeah, that's right. Communication. Well, in any change management, right, Dr. Renai, it's communication. How do we continue to reiterate where that is? Well, this has been fantastic. I will, for anybody that's interested in connecting with additional questions for Dr. Renai, for additional questions with myself, certainly we're open to those. I think in the tools that you have in the webinar tool set here, I think there's a contact name to send those to, and the both of us would love to get back to you. I've had the pleasure of working alongside Dr. Renai for some time now, and it's been fantastic to see the evolution of change that's happening in care, bringing care to the home, and in some ways really bringing the physician back to a home visit. And I think that's a little bit of the opportunity that we have in our hands. The future is amazing in this space and very exciting. Dr. Renai, is there anything you'd like to leave this audience with, just as, hey, if they're going to take something away from this call, the challenges, the opportunities of remote patient care in the home, what would you leave them with?
So first of all, understanding that your internal capabilities and how bringing in RPM workflows into your institution, what does that mean? That's the first thing that I would advise. And before any type of implementation, making sure that you have streamlined and you have reduced the amount of work burden for the practice and for your own entity unit that is providing the RPM services. That's something extremely important before doing any type of RPM program.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that. Well, listen, I would suggest that you share this presentation. I think this is going to be recorded. I think if you're on this link, you have the opportunity to share that recording with others. Share the great information that we've been able to hear from Dr. Renai at Northwell Health. And I'll pass the mic back to you, Ryan.
Thank you very much, both of you, for that very insightful presentation. As we wrap up, I would like to direct the audience's attention towards the handouts module in the GoToWebinar control panel, where you'll find some additional documentation to download for some further reading. If we couldn't attend to all your questions, know that the team at Bioformus will follow up with you, or if you have further questions, you can direct them to the email address that's up on the screen. I want to thank all of the audience for participating in today's webinar. You will receive a follow-up email from X-Talks with access to the recorded archive for this event. Additionally, I've shared a link to view the recording of the event in the chat box, which you can also share this link with your colleagues so that they may register for the recording here as well. Now, please join me once more in thanking our speakers for their wonderful time here today. We hope that you found the webinar informative. Have a great day, everyone, and thank you for coming.
Thank you so much.